I'm glad to see that the discussion of perfection is being well attended. So we're going to begin by going to the Orient for a moment and start with a Buddhist monk by the name of Kobo Daishi. This particular man was not only a great spiritual leader, but a world-famous artist in his own time. A painter, a sculptor, an architect. Many arts were perfected within his own life. On one occasion he was asked to carve a dragon to go on the top of the arch of the roof of a temple. And he made it so magnificently and so lifelike that when it was put in place, it slowly started to come to life. And Kobo saw what was happening, and he took his paintbrush, dipped it in black paint, and threw it up to the roof, and it made a spot on the dragon. And immediately the dragon settled down and made no further efforts to come to life and remained for 500 years. Now this, of course, is a bit of a fable, but it is part of an idea that I think has considerable basic value. In the Orient also, we find the great cult of imperfection. Nearly every artist of the Eastern school deliberately makes a mistake in his work. He does this because he considers perfection to be a kind of audacity. Also, that it becomes the end of his own growth. He must always be not quite perfect, and everything that he does must have a flaw so that he can continue to grow. Now, the flaw is symbolical in many cases, but it is always there for fear that the object which he has perfected would fly away unless something held it back. So he made a little mistake. He left a little crack that he didn't fill. He made a small mistake in drawing so that no one would notice it, but heaven noticed it and enabled the item to remain part of our earthly world. Now, on another level of this type of thinking, we come to a common problem that we all face in life. Perhaps this is behind the Oriental point of view. We know, for instance, that nearly all arts come to a completeness and then die. We know that the moment we are confronted with any achievement which cannot be improved upon, something ceases. And where an art is so great that we cannot exceed it, it gradually deteriorates until it fades away. We have this in modern painting, sculpturing, and other arts, graphic and architectural. We look back upon Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, and we say we cannot excel them. They have done everything that was possible to do in terms of art, not only in technique but in inspiration, the inner life of the artist. Regardless of his personal character, when he worked with his art, something tremendous moved in upon him. Today, this art we call classic, and the modern world is trying desperately to disprove it. They want to tell us that these new things that are coming along are much greater. We have freedom now. We have tremendous integrities. Things that we can't recognize. Not long ago, a large modern painting was hung in an exhibition gallery upside down because no one could figure out what the top and bottom were. This is what happens to an art which the individual feels he cannot excel. There are very few modern artists that are going to compete with Leonardo. They are just going to ignore him, develop a style of their own, influence an agent to take care of a distribution, and hope for the best. The great art, the great music, the great sculpturing cannot be excelled. Perhaps it should be. There should be something else we can do. But what can we do to the Cathedral of Cologne that has not been done? One answer was very evident. Shortly after World War II, a committee was formed to reconstruct the church and make it modern. They were going to change this magnificent Gothic structure into a Rococo building filled with gilts, floating cherubs, and everything you could think of. Fortunately, heaven or something stepped in and the project failed. But everywhere we find this problem of trying to find out how far we can take things, how far we can carry them before we meet the inevitable termination. This applies not only to art, but to every achievement of humanity. There comes a point where there seems to be no further that we can go in any direction or in any structure or any concept of life. We find it very hard to excel the religions of the past. We find it very hard to outgrow classical philosophies. And we look around us and we find nearly everything of the past in a kind of sedate ruin. We have not been able to add to it, and because we cannot improve it, it fades away. So this is one of the problems that is involved in the concept of perfection. We all would like to feel that we are growing. There are very few people who really would like to assume that they are already perfect. If they are, or if they think they are, the only direction is down. There is no further they can go. And many an egotist has gone down, simply trying to assume that he could surpass his own intelligence. Actually, therefore, in government, in world affairs, in everything, there comes a time when we must reconsider our own attitudes. We must reconsider them in relationship to our friends, our neighbors, our relatives, our families, and every involvement that we have in life. There is no reason to assume that the average human being is perfect, and very little likelihood that he will become perfect in the present as far as we can see it. Life is an eternal growth. That which no longer grows deteriorates. There is either progress due to internal strength or the structure fails. Today we are in one of these emergencies. We have come so far and done so much and accomplished so little. Here we are in this century, behind us hundreds of wars, and further wars threatening. Here we are with a literature that is tremendous and never read. We are here with a great art that is condemned as puritanical or archaic. Everywhere the modern takes over. But unfortunately, the modern is not keyed to progress. It is keyed only to change and innovation. Things are not better necessarily because they change their appearances. They are better only when they release more of integrity through themselves. Now, most people are a little unhappy at the kind of world we live in today. We are inclined to be very critical of the conduct of other people. And we are also fully aware that they are critical of our conduct. And the question always remains, what is the best answer to this perplexing dilemma? How are we going to keep on growing ourselves? Or are we also going to go into stagnation? I think a life spent around a television set is in stagnation already. And those whose lives surround only physical luxuries, who are developing habits in narcotics, alcoholism, and other related infirmities. These people are called disillusioned. We refer to them as failures, and they think of themselves as blocked by irreconcilable conflicts of life. The individual is either growing or is not growing. And all growth is improvement, but all change is not improvement. Therefore, we observe the gradual failing away of a civilization, a culture, as Rome died, as Egypt died. these great civilizations finally came to the point where they could add nothing to their previous accomplishments, and at that moment they ceased to exist. Until, as Hermes says in one of his great essays, that there was to be nothing left of Egypt but ruins buried in the sand. Now, the same thing can happen to people. The individual can reach a point of ruin. The individual can come to a place in his own life in which he sees no future and can think only in terms of sitting back and trying to enjoy what he has already accomplished. He soon finds that this accomplishment and this joy are both very impermanent, unsatisfactory, and fleeting. So we also can say to people, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, what is the next step to improve it? If you're in business, how can you do it better? If you're an artist, how can you paint a greater picture? If you're a musician, how can you come to greater virtuosity with your instrument? Satisfaction is the beginning of death, and satisfaction also stands in the way of those who reach a point where they do not know how to grow further, who do not know what to think next. And we are in a world here under a universal pattern of realities by which we are supposed to grow as long as we live. We are supposed to grow to the last moment and last breath of our material existence and go forth ready to grow some more in the future. How are we going to face this with problems that constantly confront us? Age may reduce our efficiencies in many ways. The changes in social conditions can affect and afflict us. Everywhere there are problems, most of which we face by evading. We do not come front on to these problems. We seek to escape any further pain, disillusionment, discouragement, and slowly retire into a kind of internal neurotic isolation, which is nothing but the beginning of death. So that we are constantly thinking in terms of classical wisdom, that we must live and live by growing. When we cease to grow, we cease to live. There is no reward in nature to sit back and contemplate proudly previous achievements. There is nothing to be gained by smugly believing that we have done very well, or that we have done as much as we hope to do. No one does as much as he hopes to do unless he does all that it is possible for him to do. And this means sometimes a process of reorganizing the way of life to which he belongs. He may find that he has gradually fallen into bad mental habits, that the mind which was given to him to think with has become finally simply a kind of a ghostly castle in which ancient memories vie with each other. Actually, the individual must continue to improve. Life is an art, and all arts must be improved. Not that we expect to perfect a life, but we expect to bring it a little nearer to that fulfillment which we now understand. The flaw is left there because as we grow, we will understand more. And any sense of ultimate perfection must not be allowed to develop within our consciousness. We can be grateful, thankful, and a little proud, perhaps, that we have achieved certain ends. But the moment these ends are achieved, we must move on. Any individual who settles back to enjoy his successes is already well on the way to failure. So as private citizens in our various walks of life, what are we going to do that might help us to gain a new dimension, a further unfoldment of our own potential? Well, we can make a very careful study of our available assets and liabilities. We can see where we are, what we are, and why we are, to the best of our abilities. We can realize that we have certain time at our disposal. Maybe a few years, maybe many years. How many years, we will not know. But there will always be a tomorrow until that day when the workman lays aside the tools of his craft and goes into retirement, final and complete. Until then, we are all working. Now, after the economic system developed its tremendous pressures, life became a career. The only years in which the individual actually lived were those in which he was engaged in his chosen trade, craft, or profession. This means that he prepared himself by some educational system for a trade, a craft, or way of life. He practices this until he reaches what is termed retirement. Now, retirement is a bad term in itself. No one actually retires. No one can retire as long as he can breathe. But he can attempt to fill those years ahead with matters of no concern. He doesn't want to work hard anymore. He's a little tired of trying to think. He is more or less surrounded by people who are themselves giving up the fight, and he therefore has a tendency to settle back and lose the most important years of his life. One of the Greek philosophers observed that the most valuable years in a person's life are the years which follow after the ends of labor. In other words, retirement. That then the person has the clear field to observe and plan for what he is going to do next. He must do something. He must do something with the fact that his life, as he has lived it, has a defect in it. Every person's life is like the Japanese tea bowl. There is an intentional error somewhere in it. It isn't intentional as far as the individual really understood it, but it was a built-in error, which was the result of the limitation of human perspective, the inability of adequate knowledge, or the pressures of circumstances which he was unable to resist. But in any event, when we retire from business, we retire as an artist with more work to do before he can claim to be a master of his art. So whatever we're doing at the time when we decide that we're looking for peace, leisure, and quietude, we must ask ourselves very carefully just what this is going to do for us. If we are Zen people following some meditational system, then perhaps this retirement permits a further development of that particular quality of life. The individual improves his meditational life, enriches his internal mystical experiences. To others, this is merely an avocational period. Hobbies step in. All kinds of attitudes and obligations are assumed for pleasure, relaxation, or retirement. Yet everywhere the individual is, even though he may retire, there is something to learn, something to do, and another forward step to take. Sometimes this forward step is adjustment. An individual who has done his own way and had thought his own thoughts for life suddenly finds himself limited. This is a very important challenge. If he does not accept and solve the challenge of limitation, he is failing one of the greatest experiences of life. We can put it in simple thought that the whole of a person's life leads up to those years in which his experiences become the most important factors in his existence. And experiences are things to be studied, to be analyzed, to be examined. Experiences for the average person are compounds of success and failure. They prove that some things are right and that other things are wrong. Experiences also pass through a mental process in which very often they are completely misinterpreted. The individual who had a hard life begins to be sorry for himself instead of recognizing the tremendous experience potential he has to work with. There are so many things he can learn, so many things that he can do, simply because he has had a strenuous existence, and in these working years has contacted and worked with innumerable factors and persons. The problem, therefore, is to make sure that the progress of our lives is continuous, that it never stops even for a moment. It does not follow that this progress has to be unhappy. It has to be strenuous or under some kind of a strange, rigorous discipline. It simply means that the individual continues to learn and continues to grow. A great artist continues to learn. He gradually develops skills and techniques which enable him to excel himself. And in this world, growth is to excel oneself. And failure is to sit back and smugly feel that we've done all we could. There are many things in life that we have to look back upon as definitely unfinished incidents in themselves. We have to realize that in certain occasions, at least, we walked out on the lesson, that we tried to avoid it, that we would not accept it. Then there are other times in which we have failed to repair damage that we have committed. It's interesting, of course, to realize that the mind is very aware of unfinished business. It remains somewhere in our subconscious as a kind of question, as an uncertainty, as a certain disappointment, something that we didn't solve, something that didn't work out. We forgot to apologize to the person we had injured. We continued to dislike a person we should have forgotten and forgiven. And as long as the injuries remain, we cannot forget. We can only forget that which is solved. Therefore, anything that we bring forward in memory that is in any way unpleasant is something that needs to be done right now. It brings into focus something that the subconscious has carried as a burden for years and will carry to the end if we cannot compensate it in some way. This, I think, is one of the reasons why a certain group of very wealthy persons, before they pass on, donate to huge institutions, create libraries and hospitals and universities, because in some way it's not only they can't take it with them, but they can't leave it behind and learn anything unless the gift they make is also wise. They've got to do something superior, perhaps, to what they've ever done during life. There is one case of a man who's very wealthy, who made it a definite boast in life that he never gave anything to anyone. No matter how needy, how worthy, how wonderful the cause might be, he gave away nothing. And he reached his deathbed with everything that he possessed still in his own hands. This was a problem, however, that he had to face in some way. And when his will was read, he had given everything to the charities he'd refused a dime to while he was alive. Those are kinds of quirks of human nature. They are things that we don't really understand, but in one way or another they interfere with the gracious growth of our inner values. So we have to begin to see what is the next step toward perfection. Assuming that the perfection might be thousands of years in the future, or hundreds of embodiments from now, it is still important to begin the journey. The longest journey begins with one small step, and each individual must make as much amends as he can to make the life he is completing as useful and as permanently valuable to his growth. He must therefore begin to build in the values which will survive the vicissitudes of change. I think one of the problems that we all face in these times is the need to recover from a certain habit, the habits of frustration. The ancients didn't suffer from the habits of frustration as much as we do, because they lived in a much simpler world. And while many of them passed through their lives without any great achievements, they didn't have this tremendous sense of futility that has descended upon this generation of human beings. There is a tremendous sense of hopelessness or helplessness. Now, this is all based upon the concept that the individual is completely at the mercy of his environment. It means that the person cannot do anything he wants to do because society will not let him do it. And yet this cannot be regarded as a valid excuse, because after all, no matter how heavily society impinges upon us, the inner life of the individual remains his own, not only from the cradle to the grave, but from the beginning to the end of his evolutionary cycle. There is no way in which an outside circumstance can completely frustrate the possibility of internal growth. It may be more difficult to grow under certain circumstances, but if this is true, then the achievement is that much more important. Wherever the person is, he must work toward the fullness and completeness of his own nature. So we try to look around to see what a human being should be. We have all kinds of biological definitions and so forth, and nearly all religions have their ideas as to what a human being should be. But there is also within most of us, and brought forward from centuries of relationships, a kind of general idea of what constitutes a good person. We may not really believe we can achieve it, or we may think we already have done it. But regardless of what we think, there is something every individual can face, and that is the possibility of internal growth. And this probably is very closely associated with the clash of opinionism. We hardly pick up a newspaper or anything in which we do not find articles that distress us, that we don't like, that we don't believe. Some of these apply to conditions in which certainly all human beings are in common accord. But there are many cases in news in which items of the news comes directly to some small personal opinion of our own. The opinion may not be stated in our words, but it arose in a condition of society similar to our condition, and therefore it impinges strongly upon us. All this type of impression can come under various types of ulterior motive or ulterior thinking. The individual can have prejudices, and prejudices can be tremendous things. They can be the greatest imperfections in the life of a person. A prejudice is something in which our own attitudes, very personal and very unenlightened, pass final judgment upon something we have not properly or intelligently estimated. A prejudice is the process of, in logic, in which every human being dislikes the dog that bit him, and regard that way no longer wants a dog. It doesn't make any difference how many wonderful animals there are. The person is prejudiced by an experience in his own life, and this is one of the most common causes of mistakes in human nature. We have a person belonging to a certain group. That person disappoints us or disillusions us. As a result, we turn from the whole group. We are not able to measure things by their own values. We cannot measure them entirely without consideration of the previous popularities or lack of popularity which these experiences portray. So little by little we build up attitudes that are not the result of thought, but are the result of feeling, a complete irrational feeling. Now, feelings can be a very difficult thing. Feelings should be transmuted into great artistic creativities, but they aren't always. Very often feelings are very personal mistakes in the character defects of the person. Now, why would a person have wrong feelings? Well, he's been hurt. Perhaps he has not been educated to understand the values and facts involved. Perhaps he has not become aware of the way of life of the world in which he lives. Perhaps he is too local in his thinking. He has not gone out into the larger world of life. In his religion, perhaps he has never been further from his own beliefs than the church down the street. All kinds of limitations show up under these circumstances. And how do we know that these limitations should be changed? Perhaps they are right. Perhaps we should have these feelings. Perhaps we should acknowledge that the shoe we're wearing hurts. But it always has hurt, and it always will. This type of feeling is something we have to work with very strenuously to find out what our attitude is. When we say, I don't like Jones, we should pause right then to find out why. We may not like him because he has an unpleasant disposition. This would apparently justify our attitude. But we might also question many other facts about him. We may ask ourselves what we would do if we were Mr. Jones, but we're not. But we might realize the fact that he has passed through certain saddening experiences, frustrations, disillusionments, cruelties, that he has been under persecution for religion or race or something of this kind, and has come out embittered and very often disillusioned. But the most of us who do not feel that we are in those conditions also come out of life somewhere along the line with a certain number of prejudices, antagonisms, and attitudes which we do not wish to change, but which should change in order that our growth may be continuous and creative. So the fact that it's not easy to find perfection might also remind us that we cannot find it in others, but we seldom try to check to see how much of it we have in ourselves. Actually, when it comes down to the details, we are just about average, most of us. We have the same general feelings, the same general attitudes that we often resent in other people. We assume that our causes for these attitudes are correct and honorable, but we also assume that these causes in other people, which we do not like, are not honorable, are not in line with the experiences of life. Taking all in all, a life experience is a strangely checkered thing. Life experience is a series of adjustments. The individual is constantly under some kind of ulterior influence. The world we live in now is becoming more and more overshadowed by circumstances, conditions, and pressures which frustrate the average human being. We are under a tremendous industrialized system. We are constantly under the pressure of promotion and publicity. We are being bombarded every moment with temptations to extravagance. Every part of our life is burdened by confusion, and most of the people that we know, who might normally be very pleasant individuals, are under pressure and are also inclined to lose their dispositional assets. All of this is something that we can't do too much about, but we cannot afford to allow a world condition to completely destroy ourselves. We have to find ways to survive the pressures that we face. Actually, there must be some reason for these pressures, or they wouldn't be here. There's a great question arises on many hands in the course of time, and that is why the universal laws of existence were so complicated. If God was all-powerful, why doesn't He make us all happy and let it rest at that? Why does He make life increasingly difficult for every generation? Why is so much demanded of us, and at the same time we remain so ignorant as to how to solve our own problems? Well, this can go on forever, but the fact of the matter is that discipline is involved. We are, as a group of human beings, suffering from a serious case of spoilage in most instances. We have too many privileges, too many opportunities, and not enough real integrity. We are not ready to fight for principles, but we are often ready to fight against them. We are not able to accept lessons with dignity. We want to find ways out of them. We want to hire someone to take care of our affairs. We want to transfer our moral life to the clergy. We want to transfer our health to the physician. We want to transfer our legal problems to the attorney. We do not want to carry problems because we say we're not prepared to carry them. We don't know how to carry them. Well, it's true. In these areas, progress is not perfect. We are not really completely qualified for many decisions. But 9 people out of 10 are qualified for better decisions than they make. In some cases, they can only do the best they can. But if they've really done that, there is a certain peace of mind that comes from that. But where they are reaching out for something they don't deserve and don't get it, then there is great trouble and distress and emergency in the family. So we have to try to find out what to do about the kind of world we live in. Today we are living in a most complicated world. The threat of war hangs over our heads. This is probably one of the great threats of existence. And yet, when it comes to trying to solve the problem of war, it's not so easy. One of the reasons it's not so easy is that war is so wound into everything else that involves our existence. If peace was firmly declared, unemployment would double. And the individual who is employed is more concerned with working than he is with what he is making. These things are hard to equate, and in many instances we will not be able to solve them immediately. Then we have displaced persons. We have tremendous tangles and projects that seem to have no beginnings and no ends. But out of these projects there slowly emerges a pattern of universal purpose. And in spite of all our discontents and the miseries of existence, today, if we are very thoughtful, we can see the pattern coming through all around. Things are definitely moving, and finally they are moving in the right direction. But they will not move in the right direction completely until they have moved in every wrong direction and found it out. The individual is always going to take the lines of least resistance, and integrity requires the lines of the greatest resistance. So we are looking around to find how to improve or get a little nearer to perfection in the various aspects of our thinking. I believe that one of the most important things that we have to work with is to find some kind of a basic concept of value that we can accept, that does not require the belief in strange and marvelous things that we don't understand. That there are ways in which we can simply face facts that have been proven by ages of application. Principles do not change. The applications of principles may change, but the integrities are basic, and the problems that we have arise from our resistance to these integrities. So for the person who is not going to go into a profound scholarly research, a research which may prevent him from ever having any time to do the things he discovers, we will face into a very simple problem, the next step in self-improvement. What is the next thing that we must do to really grow? Well, it isn't a vacation in the Bermudas. It isn't another weekend in Las Vegas. The things we have to do in order to get straightened out is to find out how to make our own thinking straight, constructive, and realistic. These changes are necessary. We are now moving largely upon appetites. We are moving upon privileges and pleasures. We are wasting our lives and our goods in the desperate effort to enjoy ourselves. And gradually, one by one, these joys fade, and the end is misery. So we have to start with something, so let's try to think out a few basic facts. The first basic fact is that we as individuals are here to grow. We are not here primarily to have more. We are here to be more. And actually, of course, if we believe we must have more long enough, we will destroy ourselves and be right back in the position where we have to find out what we are worth as individuals, as living things. So that all the releases of internal have to do with internal values, realities. One of these, for instance, that we are working with constantly is the ability to face reality without tension. The individual does not have to depend upon a variety of sedatives in order to face the common tasks of living. It is perfectly possible to smooth out the inner life. This is done by discipline, and many of these disciplines are found in the mystical and esoteric religions of mankind. But their primary purpose is simply to allow the individual to do what is necessary and what must be done with the least strain upon himself. He can make things difficult or he can make things easy. He can accept a challenge in the beginning instead of having it forced upon him in the end. He can go through all kinds of changes and situations if something can be done to prevent his mind from becoming all confused, mixed up, and uncertain the moment an emergency arises. So we can say, if you can learn one thing, whatever happens, face it in a condition to use your faculties. If an emergency arises, you should think as clearly as possible. But in most emergencies, the individual destroys the power to think at the beginning of the emergency. He becomes involved in all kinds of pressures. He is looking for escapes. He is sorry for himself. He is antagonistic towards others. He dislikes his world. He knows all kinds of people responsible for his trouble. And he gets all worked up and ceases completely to improve as a person. In the course of doing this, by the way, of getting himself all worked up, he destroys his digestion, affects his elimination, endangers his vitality, and shortens his life. If he is enough worked up over a situation, he may have a stroke or a coronary, and the world will go on just as it was. And there will be no way in which he can really change the circumstances that he has forced upon himself. So the beginning of intelligent living is to live quietly, quietly within. This does not mean weakness. It does not mean that you agree with anything that is not right. But you face things directly, simply, quietly, without emotional overtones, and weigh all things and cling unto that which is good. This way is a great saver of energy. And a life lived this way is apt to develop a number of extra years in which to learn more and accomplish more that needs the doing. But at the beginning of every effort to grow, the individual must so attitude himself that he is not going to block all possibilities of growth before he has a chance to come. Having come to this meaningful decision, the person simply takes a deep breath and counts 10. That was grandmother's favorite solution to problems. She always counted to 10, and if it didn't quite work, she counted to 10 again. And by the fourth or fifth cycle around to 10, she had the matter under control. So the moment an emergency arises, keep quiet. Do not commit yourself to anything. People have lost fortunes because they talk too soon. Actually, be quiet. Think all things through and try to work out for yourself the most just and the most benevolent way of solving the problem. If there is a problem involving temperaments and personalities, try to decide which of the persons involved is right. If you can't find any rightness in any of them, at least keep quiet. Do not, as Pythagoras said, stir fire with a sword. Relax. Do the best you can to arbitrate difficulties. And in the course of so doing, you start early enough, you will not have spoiled children, because they are largely spoiled because the parent cannot stand the pressure of young people's negative or confused attitudes. They want to control these children too much, but they do not give them the intelligent background to solve their own problems. So problemed parents are going to have problemed children. Problemed workmen are going to have problemed bosses. And problemed countries are going to have problemed leaders.